We are delighted that you would join us on this Monday. We're going to bring you up to date. I don't know if you were dialed into the news over the weekend, but interestingly enough, the New York Times posted on their website a big six-part story by a fellow by the name of David Kirkpatrick. And essentially what he did was he went over to Libya and he talked to a bunch of the people he says were deeply involved in what happened in Benghazi that night. And according to the New York Times report, hey, that video did have something to do with it. He said there's no evidence that al-Qaeda or any other terror group was infiltrated in Benghazi, and that video perhaps accelerated the anger toward Americans.
So these are the things that we'd initially heard, you know, the talking points similar to what we heard from Susan Rice on all of the Sunday shows, you know, a year ago or so. But that is not the case, according to a lot of sources on the ground who have spoken to our Adam Housley, and they're outraged about this. They say this is an all-out lie, that it was a coordinated attack, that al-Qaeda did have something to do with it, that people were watching the gates, that there were men pointing in one direction and you know, saying, do this over there. It didn't seem like something that was just spontaneous. Representative Mike Rogers talks about this too, and here's what he has to say.
There was some level of pre-planning, we know that. There was aspiration to conduct an attack by al-Qaeda and their affiliates in Libya, we know that. The individuals on the ground talked about a planned tactical movement on the compound. Even this is the compound before they went to the annex. All of that would directly contradict what the New York Times definitively says was an exhaustive investigation. Tells me they didn't talk to people on the ground who were doing the fighting, the shooting, and the intelligence gathering. When you put that volume of information, I think it proves that that story is just not accurate.
And the interesting thing is that the New York Times story has ignited this firestorm, a bipartisan firestorm in America. Even Representative Adam Schiff of California said, I agree with Mike Rogers and what he just said, that al-Qaeda was involved and that Congress, based on intelligence that they see, say, yes, al-Qaeda was absolutely involved. And so the question becomes, is this the report now that the mainstream media has kind of been waiting for? And so we watched Meet the Press yesterday, where they went hard after Congressman Darrell Issa. Take a look at this. This is really incredible to watch.
You said repeatedly that it was al-Qaeda, and the reason that matters is that you and other critics said the president specifically won't acknowledge it's al-Qaeda because it's an election year, and he wants to say that after bin Laden, it's been decimated and would make him look bad if it were al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda is not decimated, and there was a group there that was involved that is linked to al-Qaeda. What we never said, and I didn't have the security look behind the door, that's for other members of Congress, of what the intelligence were on the exact correspondence with al-Qaeda, that sort of information. Those sources and methods I've never claimed.
Why use the term al-Qaeda? Because you and other members of Congress are sophisticated in this and know that when you say al-Qaeda, people think central al-Qaeda. They don't think militias that may be inspired by bin Laden and his other followers. So it is a hot button for political reasons from the administration's critics.
But Andrea, it was accurate. There is a group that was involved that claims an affiliation with al-Qaeda. Now, al-Qaeda is not a central command and control. It was, in fact, a loose group that could take general statements and act on them. The fact is, people from this administration, career professionals, have said under oath there was no evidence of any kind of reaction to a video, and, in fact, this was a planned attack that came quickly. That's the evidence we have by people who work for the U.S. government and were under oath.
Do you notice how David Gregory and Andrea Mitchell both tried to gang up on him like, hey, wait a minute, you Republicans were trying to tell us that it was al-Qaeda. And the New York Times, yeah, they wouldn't have a dog in that race. The New York Times says it wasn't al-Qaeda and it was related to that video and stuff like that. What's interesting is I've spoken to people who were on the ground. Did you realize that the house next to the consulate was owned by Ansar al-Sharia, the al-Qaeda affiliate? Did you realize there were al-Qaeda flags flying over Benghazi for the month before? And in fact, they had a week of briefings leading up to September the 11th of that year. And the counterterrorism experts said the number one thing we've got to worry about is al-Qaeda. So the stuff you read in the New York Times, okay, maybe they've got a political axe to grind there. They've got an agenda there, but that simply is not what is true.
But facts are facts, and Anna was just talking about Adam Housley's story, which is an incredible story published yesterday, and he speaks to sources who were witnesses to the attack. It was a coordinated attack.
Yeah.
It is completely false to say anything else. It is completely a lie. One witness to the attack told Fox News, talking about the Times account, guys were coming to the compound, moving left, moving right, and using IMT, individual movement techniques. This was not a spontaneous attack.
And there are names that multiple sources are floating around, namely Ahmad Abu Khattala, and he essentially led the ground forces from the Libyan military militia there that is also tied to Ansar al-Sharia, and that is essentially the name of the game, the biggest one in town right now with the most personnel and the most money and the most training, and so these other militias are not wanting to turn him in because they also have ties. So it's getting into the weeds what the mainstream media is doing when they're saying it's not really al-Qaeda.
Well, and you got to wonder, why would the New York Times put that story out there? Could it possibly have anything to do with, let's see, who was running the State Department back then? Oh, yeah. Would she possibly be running for president? It kind of looks like that to a
and let's talk about credibility. For the New York Times to accept the word of anonymous sources who were allegedly participants in this attack on Americans at that facility and say, yes, we believe them over the intelligence that Congress has seen and that congressional leaders, Democrats and Republicans, have gone out on the record to say is absolutely contradictory to what they're saying. That's quite incredible to me, that the mainstream media, including Meet the Press, would have such little regard for congressional investigation. I find to be incredible.
So let's ask everybody at home, what do you think about these conflicting reports? Email us, friends@foxnews.com. We have some headlines.